You think you know someone. You spend years with them. You share your deepest thoughts, your biggest dreams. You believe you're building a future together. Every shared smile, every quiet whisper in the night, every glance filled with trust only strengthens this illusion of indestructibility. You give yourself completely, unconditionally, building walls of promises and plans that seem as unshakable as mountains. And then, in a single moment, it all comes crashing down. Not just cracking, but shattering into millions of tiny fragments, each one painfully cutting your soul, reminding you of what was and what will never be again. It's not just a story about betrayal, which could be dismissed as a trivial life experience. This is about losing yourself when you lose someone else, about how a part of your soul seems to die, leaving behind an emptiness that feels impossible to fill, and how damn hard it is to put yourself back together from those broken pieces. Incredibly hard, almost impossible when it feels like all your supports have been knocked out from under you and you're falling into an abyss of despair. My name is Derek. I'm 32, living in Austin, Texas. A few years ago, I was engaged to a woman I believed was the love of my life, Sarah. It sounds like a cliche, doesn't it? Love of my life. But back then, it felt exactly like that, without any doubt, as if every atom of my body found peace only when I was near her. We met in college. She was studying psychology. I was an engineering major. I remember seeing her for the first time in the student cafe. She was sitting at a table, her face lit by the sun streaming through the window, and she was laughing at something her friend had said. Her laugh, it was like little bells, pure and infectious. She was the kind of person who walked into a room and instantly made it warmer, as if the sun entered with her, dispelling shadows and filling the space with vital energy. Her laugh could turn a bad day around. Even the darkest thoughts receded when I heard her carefree peals of laughter. And her hugs, God, her hugs felt like coming home. Not just physical warmth, but some deep, calming sense of belonging, as if all life's storms quieted in her embrace. They were my sanctuary, my anchor in the turbulent sea of everyday life. After 6 years together, when it seemed we knew absolutely everything about each other, I decided to take the step. I proposed. I took her to our favorite lookout spot in the Blue Ridge Mountains. I remember my hands trembling as I pulled out the box. The wind blew across our faces, and the sunset painted the sky in incredible hues. She cried and said yes. Her tears were tears of happiness, and they made me the happiest man alive. In that moment, I felt like the whole world was at my feet and that nothing could overshadow our shared future. We were confident we would overcome any obstacles because we were together. We started planning the wedding. Sarah was deep in the details: Pinterest boards, color schemes, flowers, napkins, you name it. She obsessed over it like the whole world depended on that perfect day, and I loved her for her passion, for her dedication, for her desire to make everything perfect. I loved watching her excitedly talk about choosing the cake or which chairs would best fit the overall style. It was sweet, in its own way naive, and I considered it another one of her charming traits. I even imagined her planning children's birthdays with the same meticulousness, and that brought warmth to my soul. But then she changed. It happened subtly, like a shadow slowly creeping over a bright day. At first, it was barely noticeable. She started working late. Her phone was always with her, even in the bathroom, which was unthinkable before. She seemed distant, distracted, her thoughts seemingly wandering far from me, from us, from our life together. I told myself it was wedding stress, that it would pass. I convinced myself it was normal, that all brides worry, and that it was temporary. Maybe she was just tired. Maybe she needed time. I wanted to believe it with all my heart. But there was this moment I'll never forget. We were sitting on the couch watching TV. Her phone buzzed. She saw the screen and just hit decline. I caught a glimpse of the name, Nate Jim. She never mentioned a Nate. I asked casually, trying not to reveal my concern, new trainer? She nodded too quickly, too nervously. Yeah, just a guy helping me with my form. Her voice sounded a little strained, and her gaze flickered past me, not lingering. Something about it felt off. A tiny crack formed in my gut. It was like a tiny, barely noticeable fault line in a perfect mirror, but I felt it was there and it bothered me. A chill ran down my spine and I couldn't ignore it despite all attempts to rationalize her behavior. The following week, she acted sweet. Brought home my favorite pastries. Offered me back rubs. Smiled, but it didn't feel real. It wasn't her genuine, warm smile that I knew and loved. It was a mask, and I felt it in every cell of my body. I couldn't explain it, but I knew. You don't always need evidence. Sometimes your intuition is enough. It's like an internal compass that starts to go crazy even when everything seems calm externally. I tried to ignore it. I wanted to believe her, to believe in our story, in what we were building, but that voice in my head kept whispering. It grew louder, more insistent, and I couldn't silence it anymore. It whispered about suspicions, about strange changes, about how something was wrong, very wrong. One night, she left her laptop open. She went to take a shower. I never snooped, never had to. Our relationship was based on trust, and the very thought of prying into her privacy was alien to me. But that laptop, it was calling me. A magnet that gave me no peace. It felt like an open door to the most terrifying truths. I hesitated. My fingers trembled. What if I found what I didn't want to see? What if my world crumbled in an instant? But curiosity, mixed with fear, won out. I opened her messages. There he was, Nate. What I read made my chest tighten like a vice. The words danced before my eyes, but their meaning was clear as crystal and just as sharp. Can't wait for tonight. You moaned so good last time. Your fiancé still clueless? Wear that black thing I like? This wasn't just a message. These were knife blows, each one penetrating deeper into my soul. I didn't feel anger. I felt hollow. Like someone had reached inside me and taken out every part that mattered, leaving behind only a cold, lifeless shell. My dreams, hopes, the future we were building, everything crumbled to dust. She came out of the shower. I was still standing there, her laptop in my hands. She froze. Her gaze slid from my face to the screen, and I saw her face turn white as chalk. "What are you doing?" she asked. Her voice was barely audible, almost a whisper. I didn't answer. I just handed her the laptop. She looked at the screen. And then nothing. No panic. No apology. Just silence, heavy as a tombstone. This silence was worse than any screams. It was confirmation, cold and undeniable. "Say something," I said, my voice low, almost unintelligible. I waited for any reaction. Tears, denials, anger, anything that would give me a clue, an opportunity to understand. She sat down, avoided my eyes. Her gaze was fixed on the screen as if she was looking for answers that weren't there. "How long?" I asked, feeling each word escape me with incredible effort. "About 3 months," she whispered. 3 months, while we were booking venues, talking baby names, when I was kissing her goodnight and she was with him. When I was planning our honeymoon and she was cheating on me. When I believed her every word and she was a lie. I walked out. No words. No suitcase. I didn't even take my keys. I just left. The feeling was as if I was breaking free from a trap that had just closed around me. I walked aimlessly, feeling nothing but a dull emptiness. What followed were the darkest 3 months of my life. I stayed with my brother on his couch. ate maybe once a day, if at all. Lost over 20 pounds, and my body felt like a stranger, wasted. I avoided mirrors. They only showed me a fool who should have seen this coming. My friends tried to help, said, "Bro, you just need to get drunk, meet someone new." But booze doesn't erase pain. It just dulls the body. The soul remembers everything. It remembers every betrayal, every deception, every tear. I felt like I was being swallowed by some black hole from which there seemed to be no escape. The nights were long, sleepless, filled with phantom pain. I replayed every moment in my head, trying to find signs I missed, warnings I ignored. It was self-torture. I started seeing a therapist. First time in my life. I thought I was broken, that something was wrong with me, that I could never recover. Turns out I was just human. Betrayal is a kind of death. You lose someone who's still walking around, and that's the cruelest part. You see them, you know they exist, but the person you loved has died, leaving behind only an empty shell. This paradox tore me apart. It wasn't just a loss, but some surreal loss where the object of loss still exists, but no longer for you and not in the form you knew them. It was hard to accept, to comprehend. One morning, I woke up and felt nothing. No pain, just empty. But in that emptiness, something had shifted. It was a strange feeling, as if after a long and strong storm, there was complete silence. I wasn't who I used to be. This was not death, but a rebirth. I wasn't the naive Derek who blindly trusted. I was someone else, and it was both terrifying and liberating. I started rebuilding, gym, journaling, new projects. Every action was a brick in the foundation of my new life. I even started a podcast about surviving heartbreak. It was my therapy, my way of turning pain into something constructive. People started writing in, "Your story helped me get through my divorce. Your voice saved me from doing something stupid." And I realized maybe my pain had a purpose. Perhaps it wasn't a punishment, but a tool to help others. This gave me new meaning, a new reason to move forward. 6 months later, I ran into her, Sarah, randomly in a Whole Foods parking lot. The day was sunny, but for me, it suddenly clouded over. My heart skipped a beat. She looked different, tired, no makeup, in sweats. This wasn't the radiant Sarah I once knew, not the one who so meticulously chose every element of her look. When she saw me, she froze. Her eyes widened, and a frightened deer-like expression appeared on her face. "Hi," she said. Her voice was barely audible. "Hey," I replied. My own voice sounded strange and detached. We stood there, just staring. Time seemed to stop. Life was bustling around us, people hurried with their groceries, but for us, there was only us in this awkward, tense silence. Thousands of unsaid words hung in the air. "I know I have no right to bother you," she said, her gaze dropping to the ground. "But I want to show you something." Her eyes were filled with some strange mixture of fear and determination. My heart started pounding like crazy again. I felt the blood drain from my face. She pulled out her phone. I didn't know what to expect. Another blow? Another deception? Or perhaps this was the beginning of something new, something that could heal old wounds. My thoughts raced wildly. It was a photo, old, worn. Us. I was holding my graduation diploma. She was next to me, smiling, eyes full of pride. On the back, in her handwriting, "You are my future." "I found it in an album," she said, her voice trembling. "And I realized you really were my world, and I destroyed it." Her words sounded like an admission, sincere and painful. They were like a bitter confession of what she had done, and I felt some part of my old pain release. I looked at her, and for the first time in forever, I saw her. Not the cheater, not the liar, but the girl who once whispered to me, "I'm not afraid of anything as long as you're with me." The girl who was my whole world. The girl I loved madly. That memory of our shared dream flashed through me, and for a moment I felt a slight, barely noticeable desire to turn back time. But I was different now. This Derek could no longer be the naive guy he was before. After that day, we didn't talk for weeks. But something hung in the air, a strange tension, nostalgia mixed with pain. It was like an incurable wound that had slowly begun to heal but left a scar that reminded me of the past. Every time I thought of her, it was a mixture of pain from betrayal and warmth from old memories. It was exhausting, but at the same time, it kept me from completely forgetting. Then she started texting, slowly. No pressure. Just one message every few days. Little things. Old memories. Thoughts? I didn't respond. I read them all, but stayed silent. This was my new strength, my silent confirmation that I was no longer her puppet. Her every message seemed to be an attempt to reach out, to test the waters, but I remained firm, protecting my newly rebuilt world. Then came the letter, handwritten, full of regret, honesty, trauma. She poured her heart out, talked about fear, shame, mistakes she never had the courage to own. It was hard to read, but I felt it was sincere. She didn't make excuses, but simply told her side, her feelings. She talked about pressure, about doubts, about her own fears that pushed her to take such a step. It didn't excuse her, but it provided some understanding, made me look at the situation from a different angle. I read it 3 times. First, I felt anger, which seemed to have disappeared but flared up again. Then sadness, deep, bottomless sadness for the lost past and for shattered dreams. Then peace. A strange, incomprehensible peace. A peace that comes after you allow yourself to let go of resentment and pain. It was like a heavy burden being lifted from my shoulders, and I texted her, "Thank you." Just one word, but it meant so much. It meant I had read, that I had heard, that I had accepted. We met again. No expectations. Just 2 broken people with enough guts to face each other, like 2 storms meeting after a long period of solitude. We sat at a table in a cafe. The air was electrified, but no longer with hostility, but with some strange new energy. We talked for a long time about everything and nothing, about our past, about her pain, about my desperate struggle for recovery. The story could have ended there. It would have been logical, even poetic. Recovery, forgiveness, moving on. But life, as always, has its own plans. But then Sarah looked at me and said, "There's something else, something you don't know. Something that could change everything." Her eyes were full of some strange mixture of fear and determination. My heart started pounding like crazy again. I felt the blood drain from my face. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely audible, almost a whisper. My mind raced frantically, trying to grasp her words, their potential meaning. What else could there be, after everything we had been through? What other secrets was she hiding? She hesitated, looked away, then back into my eyes. Her gaze was deep, filled with indecision, but at the same time, some new strength. During the time we were apart, I took a test. The result was positive. My breath caught. My mind raced. What could it be? A test for what? An illness. But she was already pulling something from her purse. A piece of paper. An ordinary sheet, but it suddenly became the center of my universe. She laid it gently on the table. I read it, and everything inside me collapsed and rebuilt at the same time. It was a feeling as if the ground had slipped from under my feet, but at the same moment, a new, stronger foundation appeared. It wasn't just shock, it was an earthquake of the soul. The emptiness I felt suddenly filled with something incredible, something that shifted all my priorities, all my ideas about the future.